On March 10, 2026, in a game between the Miami Heat and the Washington Wizards at Casillas Center in Miami, Florida, Bam Adebayo scored 83 points. Read that again. Bam Adebayo. Miami Heat center. Three-time All-Star. Known primarily as one of the best defenders in the league. A player whose career high before that night was 41 points. A player who had not been voted to the All-Star game this season. A player who had attempted 22 three-pointers in his first 6 NBA seasons combined. That player scored 83 points in a single NBA game. The second most points any player has ever scored in a single game in NBA history. Behind only Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point performance on March 2, 1962. Ahead of Kobe Bryant's 81-point game on January 22, 2006. Wilt. Bam. Kobe. That is the list now. And Bam Adebayo sat in the middle of it looking exactly as stunned as the rest of the world felt. He said after the game, "Wilt, me, then Kobe. It sounds crazy." He also said he apologizes to absolutely no one. Because within hours of that final buzzer, the basketball world divided into two factions so loud and so fundamentally opposed that the argument is still going stronger today than it was the night it happened. One faction says this was the greatest individual scoring performance of the modern era and Bam Adebayo deserves every bit of recognition the record brings. The other faction says this was a stat-padding exhibition against a deliberately cooperative opponent that disrespects the memory of Kobe Bryant and embarrasses the integrity of the sport. Both sides are presenting evidence. Both sides are absolutely certain they are right. And the entire basketball world is in the middle of one of the most entertaining and most genuinely contested debates the NBA has produced in years. This is the full story. Every angle of it. Let us start with what actually happened because the facts of the game tell you almost everything you need to understand why the debate exists. The Miami Heat entered March 10 on a 5-game winning streak, fighting for playoff seeding in a competitive Eastern Conference. The Washington Wizards entered at 16-47. One of the worst records in the league. A team that has spent most of the second half of the season managing young players toward the future and positioning themselves for a high draft pick. A team that was, by every honest assessment, not trying to maximize their competitiveness in late March games that have no bearing on their season. Bam Adebayo scored the Heat's first 7 points of the game in the first 3 minutes. Then he scored 18 of their next 20. By the end of the first quarter he had 31 points. Not 31 points in the game. 31 points in the first quarter. The second highest single quarter scoring total since play-by-play data was first tracked in 1997. By halftime he had 43. 2 points better than his previous career high for a full game. His teammates understood what was happening. And at some point in the second half, the game stopped being about winning and started being about the record. The Heat had a comfortable lead. And they fed Bam. Every possession. Every timeout. Every decision was made in service of getting him the ball in positions to score. By the third quarter he had 62. The Heat were up by 25 points with about 3 minutes remaining in the fourth. And here is where it gets complicated. Heat players intentionally fouled Washington players to stop the clock and get the ball back. Washington players intentionally fouled Heat players who were not Adebayo to put non-record-chasing players on the free throw line and get the ball back. Bam's teammate Keshad Johnson, who was fouled and sent to the line, deliberately bricked his second free throw attempt to give the Heat a live rebound so they could run a possession back to Adebayo. The Heat challenged a dubious offensive foul call on Adebayo when the score was 150-105 with under 3 minutes left. Not because the game mattered. Because every possession for Bam mattered. Coach Eric Spoelstra challenged an offensive foul call at a score of 150-105 with under 3 minutes remaining. That is not coaching a basketball game. That is directing a history-making performance with every tool available. Adebayo finished with 83 points on a stat line that reads like a fever dream. 20 for 43 from the floor. 7 three-pointers. And NBA records of 36 free throw makes and 43 free throw attempts in a single game. For comparison, Kobe Bryant's 81-point game in 2006 involved 28 field goal attempts and 18 free throw attempts. The numbers do not look the same because the games do not look the same. Now let us give Bam his full due before we get into the criticism. Because what he did that night deserves real acknowledgement before anyone starts picking it apart. He scored 31 points in the first quarter against a defense that was not intentionally cooperating at that point. The game was still a game in the first half. Washington was playing defense. Their players were competing. And Bam was unstoppable. He was attacking the rim. He was knocking down mid-range jumpers. He was hot from three in a way nobody had ever seen from him. His 43 halftime total came against a team that was actively trying to defend him. That part of the night was genuine and extraordinary. By halftime the entire basketball world was watching. NBA League Pass crashed. The top two trending topics globally on X were Bam and Kobe, flip-flopping between number 1 and 2 for hours. An arena that started the night as a quiet regular season game in late March was on its feet screaming with every basket. That energy was real. The players on both teams were part of something historic and they felt it and they behaved accordingly. And Adebayo himself, in those first 3 quarters, was locked into something. He said the energy and the ball just kept finding him. He was not manufacturing shots. He was flowing. The kind of performance that every elite scorer describes as being in a zone, where the basket looks enormous and the ball does not miss and the only thought in your head is the next possession. He wondered out loud what Kobe would say about being passed. He said Kobe would probably tell him to do it again. He said it was just a surreal moment to be in the company of somebody you idolized growing up. That emotional reality is true and it matters. Bam Adebayo grew up watching Kobe Bryant. He modeled parts of his game on Kobe's footwork and mid-range precision. He passed the player he idolized on one of the most permanent lists in sports. You do not take that away from him regardless of what else happened in that game. Now let us talk about the criticism. Because it is not all from Kobe stans on social media. Some of the people who pushed back hardest are among the most credible voices in basketball. ESPN writer Tim McMahon said it was just awful, hideous, disgusting basketball down the stretch and that he was cracking up laughing watching it. Gordon Hayward said he did not think it was great for the league. That it highlighted how teams are already struggling. That with all these teams tanking it kind of makes it feel not legit. Former Laker Robert Horry said at some point you have to respect the game and there were moments in this game where it was not respected. The specific criticism is not really about Bam. It is about the conditions. A 16-47 Washington team with Trae Young sitting out. A game out of hand by the third quarter. Intentional fouling by both teams in the service of one player's statistical pursuit. A coaching staff using timeouts and challenges to protect possessions that had no bearing on the game's outcome. ESPN's commentator Doris Burke said she was slightly uncomfortable with some of the intentional fouling and free throw strategy in the final minutes. Slightly uncomfortable is a very measured way of saying what a lot of the basketball world said far more loudly. The game itself became a vehicle for a record rather than a competition. Here is the comparison that makes the most uncomfortable reading for everyone who wants to dismiss the criticism entirely. Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game in 1962 has faced the exact same criticisms for 64 years. The Knicks of that era fouled Philadelphia Warriors players deliberately to stop the clock and get the ball back. The Warriors fouled Knicks players to do the same thing. The final minutes of that game looked almost exactly like the final minutes of Bam's 83-point game. Two different teams. Two different eras. 64 years apart. Same strategy. Same uncomfortable late-game theater. Wilt's record has stood for 64 years in spite of that criticism. Nobody seriously argues his 100-point game did not happen or does not belong in the record books. The question for Bam Adebayo is whether 83 will age the same way. The defense of Bam has been loud and credible too. Pat Riley, the most respected executive in Heat history, called the criticism unjustified. He said Bam does all the winning things, the things that do not get recognized, that he puts his body out there and is a rugged competitor, and that the reaction was not fair. Shaquille O'Neal said kids should be inspired by Bam's 83-point game. He said he was the latest NBA figure to defend the performance. Shaq, who understands exactly what it means to be a dominant physical player accused of benefiting from opponents who cannot foul someone efficiently, was clear. This is worthy of inspiration. Stephen A. Smith lambasted the Wizards. He said they actually looked like they were helping Bam Adebayo capture the record. He was not defending or criticizing Bam in that moment. He was criticizing Washington for making their participation in the late-game strategy so obvious that even casual fans noticed it. And Vince Carter said it was dope watching Bam shoot his way into history. Kelly Oubre Jr. discredited it by comparing it to Joel Embiid's 70-point game. The basketball world split exactly down the middle and has stayed there for 7 days. Here is the question at the center of this debate that nobody has cleanly answered. And it is a question that matters for how we think about the NBA's record books going forward. When does a performance become a record and when does it become an artifact? Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game is in the record books and will almost certainly stay there forever. But it happened against a team that was cooperating in the late stages. In an era where the quality of the opposition was different from today. Under conditions that the modern NBA would not recognize as a real basketball game in those final minutes. And we accept it. Because the record happened. Because the number is real. Because the ball went through the basket 36 times or however many times it went, and no amount of late-game strategy changes the fact that it happened. Bam Adebayo scored 83 points on March 10, 2026 at Kaseya Center in Miami against the Washington Wizards. The number is real. The ball went through the basket. The free throws were made. The game was not fabricated or fixed or manipulated in any meaningful illegal sense. It was just basketball played in an unusual way in the fourth quarter of a game whose outcome was not in question. Whether you think that deserves the same status as Kobe's 81, scored against the Toronto Raptors in a competitive game his team needed, is a question that has no clean answer. And it is a question the basketball world is going to be arguing about every time Bam's name appears on a list with Wilt's and Kobe's for as long as the NBA exists. Bam Adebayo said after the game that he wondered what Kobe would say to him. He said he always wanted to have a conversation with Kobe. That he idolized him growing up. And then he said he thinks Kobe would probably tell him to do it again. He also said he apologizes to absolutely no one. That response is perfect for this specific moment and this specific player. He is not going to apologize for what happened on that court. He should not. He scored 83 points. The second most anyone has ever scored in an NBA game. He did it in front of a crowd that was on its feet and an arena that will tell the story of being there for generations. He passed the player he grew up watching. The conditions were what they were. The late-game strategy was what it was. The Washington Wizards were what they were. None of those facts make 83 a smaller number. None of them put the ball back in his hands and move it to the other team's basket. Wilt. Bam. Kobe. That is the list. And the debate about what it means is going to outlast all of us.